So Kumo and I had a come to Jesus discussion last night. He said something to the effect that I've been too negative as of late. And he cited not one but 3 episodes on how the sedan is dying and crossovers are taking over the world. And he threw me out, and not just of the house, he threw me out of the state and said, go and find some good news. So I came all the way to Texas, and I have indeed found good news. And here it is. This is now projected to be sold with, get this, 20 to 25% 3 pedals. Put another way, this here, handy dandy sunset orange carrying case will be 20 to 25% manual transmissions. If that is not good news, I don't know what is. Hopefully that gets me back home. But in the interim, you and I are going to stay here in Texas and do a tech review of the 2019 Hyundai Veloster with manual transmission. So yeah, this may be an entirely new car, but the engines you and I have seen before. There are 2 on offer. The first one, which is the most basic one, is also the bigger of the 2. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder, good for 147 horsepower, comes in at 6,200 RPM, 132 pounds of torque, comes in at 4,500 RPM. But then the engine you and I are excited about is the 1.6 turbo gasoline direct injected model. Now this one we've driven many times before, but here there's a couple things going on. Number one, 201 horsepower, comes in at 6,000 RPM. We've seen that before. 195 pounds of torque, comes in at 1,500 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 4,500 RPM. We've seen that before as well. But what's new here is, it's kind of a riddle. What does this have in common with the 911 Turbo S? And the answer would be overboost. So for the first time, this 1.6 turbo has an overboost function, so it goes up to 202 pounds of torque for about 5 seconds. Now, how does that get power to the wheels? Well, it's front-wheel drive, as you could probably see here. Interesting. So with that 2-liter, there's 2 transmissions on offer, a 6-speed manual or a 6-speed automatic. In the turbo model, also 2 transmissions on offer, 6-speed manual, which is the one we're going to drive, or that 7-speed dual clutch, which is manufactured by Hyundai, and that one we're not going to drive, at least in the coming full first drive review episode. Maybe a living with episode down the road. So as we move inside, I'm going to switch things up on you because the car that we're featuring through this tech review, as well as in the full first drive review, is the lightest, most powerful Veloster on offer with a manual transmission, the R-Spec, the one you and I want to drive. However, there's another one on offer, and it's the fancy one. That's this car, the Ultimate. And the first thing you notice is this is a 2-tone interior, which is great. Not that the other one doesn't have a 2-tone interior, but it's just the seats. This one is not just a leather seat with this red stripe, but it's also on the dash. And I would argue it accentuates the design theme here, and it's kind of what we've come to expect from Hyundai nowadays. This looks very similar to that Kona that we just drove in Hawaii. And the good news is that means it has real knobs and real buttons instead of haptic feedback. So very positive there. Some of the negatives are it has a lot of hard plastic, more than in the Kona, specifically on the doors. Would love to see that addressed. Then there is a head-up display on offer. That's really a nice touch in a car, I would say, in this price range. Then there's a couple of interesting things beyond design. Like, for example, there is a sunroof on offer, but only in like the top 2 trims of both the 2-liter as well as in the turbo. Sadly, the R-Spec, no sunroof, would like to see that changed. Like, give me the cheaper car that's lightest with a manual transmission. At least give me the option for just the sunroof without having to get all the other options. And then something really interesting, and that is the Qi wireless. Not that that's new to Hyundai. It's seen that in many Hyundais, Genesis, and Kias. But usually, and this is not just Hyundai and Kia, they usually have the phone going like this, which presents a problem because when you pull the phone out, you always hit the shifter, whether it's a manual or automatic. Here, they have it going in portrait mode, kind of like how you would use your phone. And then, of course, there's this. My least favorite part of this episode. What's the old saying about best laid plans? We're screaming through this road here, and all of a sudden we have a major hook 'em horns moment. Figured we'd get him into the episode somehow, and we're getting a car into place, and he was right there, I promise. He was right there. Then the minute we get the camera out, he shows you his ass. But while we're here, let's at least talk driving dynamics. So a couple of things you need to understand here, and I think the size is the biggest thing we got to get to first. This is a 104.3-inch wheelbase, so that is only 2 inches shy of a Rogue. That gives you an idea of how long this thing is. And then the overall length, 166.9. Then we need to understand some of the construction. So you know how I talk about MQB and Spa and other cars where it's shared platforms. Here it's not so much a whole shared platform, it's shared units. So Hyundai breaks it up into the front, the middle section, and the rear. So for example, they can take the front section and the rear section of like the platform in that Kona and bring it to the Veloster. Like a very specific example here is the rear suspension. They've taken that multi-link unit that we drove in the Kona, but here the wheelbase is different. So by not having one specific architecture they share, they're not wedded to one specific length of wheelbase. Get it? Now, while we're on suspension, let's talk about what's there. In the front, McPherson struts. In the rear is that multi-link unit, but then there's stabilizer bars. In the front, it's 24 mils. In the rear, it's 19 mils. Then we need to understand what's connected to that multi-link unit. And this is a big departure for Hyundai, because I know we talk high-strength steel, blah, blah, blah. Here, the departure is aluminum, go figure. And it's attached to the outer edge of that multi-link unit, so the outer links. And that is now aluminum, and the idea is to lower the unsprung weight. Now, it's not a huge amount, it's 4 pounds per side, but when you consider the wheel, the tire, and the suspension bits that hang out there, that's good size mass. We're gonna have to understand how that impacts driving dynamics in the full first drive review, so make sure you come back for that. Then there are the brakes. It's 11-inch diameter rotors in the front, 10.3 in the back. Then there are the wheels. Standard is 17 inches on a 2-liter. On this very fancy R-Spec car we're going to drive, 18 inches. Then something really interesting, and that is the tires. And usually I never talk about tires on Hyundais. I know we talked about it on the E63S wagon because they were ridiculously big for a family car. Here it's Michelin Pilot Sports that are fitted as standard on a Hyundai. So I'm kind of looking forward to driving this thing, so make sure you come back for that. Okay, now that we covered all this, let's go back to our friends here, and apparently they don't want to come back and say hi, so I guess I'm left to say to you, hook 'em horns. Okay, so like other Hyundais, the Veloster shares the same concept of it is a steel company masquerading as a car company, which means 52% high-strength steel, much like in this car. What does that translate to in terms of numbers? Well, the most important one is the weight. And this one, it's actually somewhat interesting. That whole Veloster, the most basic car, 2,701 pounds. Very light when you consider the kind of power the car has. Moves all the way up to 2,855 pounds for the super duper fancy ultimate car with an automatic transmission. The car you and I will not drive. We are going to drive one with a manual transmission. Now, interesting thing about the turbo and the non-turbo, the weight does have an impact on fuel economy, but also not so much. Now, the fuel economy of the car we're going to drive, which is an R-Spec turbo manual transmission, 28, 33, 29. Not so bad. However, if it goes to a 2-liter, the fuel economy, it's not quite as good, but the best derivation of the fuel economy is the one with the more powerful engine, but the not as fun transmission. In other words, the one we're not going to drive. So, with that, please come back for the full first drive review. We're going to talk more about this car and what it has to do with the Veloster that we drove in Texas. And then I'm going to leave you with a question. The question is this. If you had to choose between a sporty compact car, my question is, which car would you choose? Would you choose a Veloster, or do you have to have even a badge in this segment, which could be the Volkswagen Golf, or you get something, say, from Ford or Chevy? In other words, does the Hyundai stand a chance in the sporty compact segment? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with a bit of a fun fact. This car I stole from somebody as I was coming into the hangar today. So technically not my car, and it's not Hyundai's. Until I see you next time, bis später.